Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're diving into the wild world of the medieval inn where weary travelers swapped stories over suspicious stew, ale flowed like water, and the real question at dawn was whether the racket upstairs was snoring or something far more ominous. Before we settle in, do me a favor, hit that like button if you're enjoying the journey and subscribe if you haven't already. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the globe. It's always fun to see this community come together across all those time zones. Alright, lights down, fan on if you've got one, and let's leap into the chaos. Picture this, the innkeeper is jolted awake not by ringing alarm, but by a thunderous sneeze echoing through the floorboards followed by a crash and the panicked clatter of a chicken bolting for freedom through the front door. He cracks when I open. Pitch dark. That means it's either way too early or way too late. There was no middle ground in medieval timekeeping. He hauls himself upright as if peeling himself off a loaf of bread, rubbing his eyes on a sleeve that used to be linen but now feels like worn saddle leather. His bed? A simple straw mattress on a wooden frame, slanted enough to make you roll toward the wall if you weren't careful. The blanket smells faintly of yesterday's garlic stew and spilled ale, a cozy reminder that cleanliness was a suggestion, not a guarantee. He dresses in stages, tunic, trousers, belt, once he finds it. It's hanging on a peg by the door alongside someone's leftover spoon, a stub of candle, and a single sock whose owner remains a mystery. Questioning any of this before sunrise is ill-advised. Heading downstairs, the common room is eerily still. A tipped mug, a boot abandoned by the hearth, and there, underneath the table, a snoring guest sprawled out like he owns the place. The innkeeper sidles around him carefully. Waking travelers too early can end in sword-point negotiations, and neither side wants that drama first thing. He stokes the fire with a practiced flick of the poker, just enough to coax warmth, not a blaze. Firewood is precious, after all, and the last time he let it roar, someone tried to roast an entire goose, feathers and all, right in the hearth. Now he's reheating last night's pottage, whatever that has mutated into overnight. Outside, a mule's bray and heavy hoofbeats signal new arrivals. The inn may not be glamorous, but it's warm, busy, and most importantly, it's his. With a deep breath, he braces himself. Breakfast is about to begin. At medieval inns, breakfast was less a meal and more an exercise in risk management. He ladles a fit portion of pottage into a pot over the hearth. No one knows what it's officially called. Pottage is more a category than a recipe. Yesterday's had barley and turnips. Today's adds whatever bits of goose fell victim to last night's clatter. Water, heat, repeat. Imagine a soup that gave up on flavor halfway through. Bread is served alongside, hard as roof tiles and equally chewy. It's sliced with care because snapping another knife blade is a headache no one needs. Guests nibble slowly, partly to aid digestion, but mostly because it gives them time to question life choices between bites. And of course there's ale, breakfast beer. Not cliché survival. The water is questionable, milk reserved for the Lord's barn cat, and tea is centuries away. The ale is weak, sure, but boiled and filtered by sheer desperation. Even the children get a small cup, though always under supervision. It's a reputable establishment after all. Slowly, travelers shuffle in. A merchant clutches his coin purse like it's sacred. A pilgrim, bleary-eyed and hunched over his staff, mutters about blisters. And yes, there's always a bard requesting honey for his porridge as though it hasn't been locked in a chest for weeks. The barmaid, Marjorie, glides among the tables like a seasoned dancer, refilling mugs, fielding every bad poem in the land, and dodging overly familiar hands with effortless grace. By mid-morning, the inn smells like smoke, barley, and ambition. Empty bowls clatter, stomachs rumble, and spirits hover somewhere between hopeful and hangover. No one's died yet, and in medieval terms, that counts as a triumph. But too many people is a real problem, and soon they start pouring in like pigeons carrying luggage, indifferent to personal hygiene. First through the door, a self-proclaimed knight in mismatched, rusty armor bound with what looks like curtain rope. He demands a private room despite offering no coin or courtesy. Right behind him, a merchant's apprentice brags about owning a fleet but insists on paying with buttons. He tries to haggle over a bowl of pottage like it's on Groupon. Then the resident bard shows up again, claiming his songs are worth more than gold. He's missing half his strings and launches into a tune about stolen goats no one asked for. A monk arrives next, blessing the furniture with solemn nods, fasting loudly until he can't resist the bread after all. By noon, you've got clashing personalities, overlapping smells, and a goat wandering in for good measure. A child darts between tables, chased by an outraged goose. Two travelers argue over the only stable stool. And overseeing this delightful chaos is the innkeeper, calm as if he's in a monastery. He knows that by evening someone will fall asleep in their own soup, someone else will challenge a stool to single combat, and the bard will try a third time to win hearts with a lute. He pours another mug, wipes down the counter with a rag that's seen too many centuries, and nods to Marjorie. No words needed. Despite everything, this place keeps running. The guests might be unpredictable, loud, occasionally bleeding, but they're the lifeblood of the inn. And the queen of this floor, the real soul of the operation, is the barmaid. Marjorie, somewhere between 20 and 30, may or may not have aged rapidly from surviving traveling troubadours. No one's certain. What matters is that without her, the whole building would collapse into a half-digested stew of chaos. Marjorie juggles trays like a circus artist, swats away unwanted advances like flies, and knows instinctively who will pay in coin and who will barter with seashells. She can spot a fake accent, a stolen ring, and a drunken compliment from a dozen paces. In this splintered, half-broken inn, she is absolute authority. Lunch arrives not as a peaceful repast but a stampede. She rings a battered iron triangle, and suddenly guests emerge from every nook: farmers, merchants, monks, and yes, the bard, ready with a new song. The innkeeper ladles out pottage whose ingredients are known only to pot and God. Guests dip their bread, inevitably losing a chunk to the stew bottom, and someone actually trades crust for another mug of ale. It works. Only Marjorie could pull that off. And through every moment, flying cutlery, spilled stew, squabbling patrons, she never drops a tray. That's the kind of magic this place runs on. Because in a medieval inn, peace is always just the pause between three dreadful messes and the next glorious disaster. Lunch ends in that all-too-familiar moment of calm, brief, eerie, as if the inn itself is holding its breath until someone drops a spoon and the chaos roars back to life. Tables are cleared, benches shoved back into place, and Marjorie and the innkeeper dive into cleanup mode. For the uninitiated, it looks like sweeping floors and stacking dishes. For them, it's an archaeological dig through a field of onion peels and mysterious stains that defy explanation. Marjorie gathers plates and mugs with the efficiency of a battlefield medic collecting casualties, while the innkeeper pushes debris under benches and hopes gravity does the rest. Behind the bar, a growing pile of lost and found items emerges: a single boot, a dagger, a battered loot pick. No one claims any of it, and it's all stashed in a maybe belongs to someone box. The stew pot is scraped clean, its contents either fed to the pigs or quietly reincorporated into tomorrow's batch with zero fanfare. Waste not, want not, the innkeeper mutters, though deep down he knows nobody will taste the difference after the third helping. By mid-afternoon, the common room breathes a sigh of relief briefly before fresh travelers arrive. The door creaks open to reveal a cloaked merchant hauling a sack of something, followed by a young couple politely requesting to see their room first. Marjorie simply points them upstairs. She's done negotiating room tours at sore point. Next in is the fancy knight, dent in his helmet, arrogance in his stride, demanding almond milk. Silence falls like a guillotine. No, they do not serve almond milk. A new bard enters stage left, lute in hand, determined to win his keep with a ballad. 3 raw notes later, Marjorie intervenes with a ladle. The message is loud and clear: no encore. Behind her, the innkeeper accommodates every polite inquiry about candle sources and stew ethics with a patient smile. He's heard them all, today's goat chase included, and he knows better than to argue. A group of merchants sets up near the hearth, discussing grain prices with the gusto of auctioneers. A monk drifts by, blessing chairs as if they needed the divine touch. All around, the clatter of mugs, laughter, and the occasional goose honk, because of course the goat has a sibling now. Dinner orders are shouted over the din: 1 bowl of pottage, 2 mugs of ale. And hey, what spices did you put in this anyway? Same as last night, Marjorie replies over her shoulder. Enjoy. As afternoon stretches into early evening, the impulse is with energy. The hearth casts flickering light over weathered faces, lanterns are lit, and anticipation hangs in the air. Supper is served, a reheated encore of the day's signature pottage with roof tile bread on the side. Guests tuck in, complaining playfully about texture and temperature, yet rarely leaving more than a spoonful behind. After all, a free meal is still a meal. Ale flows freely. Conversations overlap, a heated debate over which crust of bread makes the best improvised projectile, an old guard recounting war stories, 2 farmers swapping goat escape horror tales. A child hides behind a barrel, feeding crumbs to our omnipresent goat, who now has the run of half the building. Through it all, Marjorie moves like a guardian spirit, intercepting spills before they become floods and defusing arguments with a raised eyebrow. With supper winding down, the real entertainment begins: impromptu performances. No schedule, no stage, just whoever dares. The bard returns for one final shot, lute in hand and enthusiasm undimmed. He belts out a ballad about the fair lady of Festerwell, complete with dramatic throat noises when he forgets the words. Half the room cheers, half groans. A wandering dicer tosses wooden dice on a table. Soon, a crowd gathers, betting buttons and buttons alone. Marjorie stands vigilant, scanning for trouble. She intervenes as the bard attempts a theatrical bench splitter move and a brawl is narrowly avoided. In the corner, a shy traveler tries a few notes on his flute before the goat headbutts him into silence. Laughter erupts and someone throws a crust of bread in appreciation, applause or bribe, who can say? Night deepens. No closing bell, no usher's call, the inn winds down at its own pace. Crowds thin as bodies grow heavy with stew and ale. Some guests slump over mugs, some challenge stools to duels and lose every time. Marjorie begins stacking empty mugs into a precarious fortress. One raised eyebrow, time to wrap it up or start sweeping. A few diehards linger, a peddler demanding roast duck, offered bread and a look, a monk humming hymns to the embers, the goat curled comfortably by the hearth. Upstairs, the dormitory-style rooms await, all creaking stairs and straw mattresses. Travelers stumble up, bumping into every visible surface, promising to complain about noise come dawn. In the common room, a final lull, the hearth crackles, mugs roll off tables, someone nudges a snoring guest face first into his stew bowl. The innkeeper makes his midnight patrol, candle in hand, silent prayer on his lips. Doors are checked, coins counted, buttons and bones make the undecided value bowl, and the goat is nowhere to be found. All's well by the inn's standards. Upstairs, snoring is the new soundtrack, hiccuping squirrels of snores, hymn-mumbling monks, and one per soul narrating dreams about taxes. The chamber pot lurks behind a threadbare curtain, a universal threat to unsuspecting feet. Yet beneath the cacophony there's an odd comfort, dozens of strangers sharing the same crooked beams, all lulled by the promise of horizontal rest. Downstairs, the innkeeper collapses in a chair behind the bar, mug in hand, dreaming of quiet. Marjorie returns wrapped in resolve and a shawl, inventorying overnight casualties, spilled ale, overturned stools, one missing candle. Questions fly. Has anyone seen my satchel? Did I pay last night? Is this my goat? Marjorie's answer, a flat maybe. Morning light filters through shuttered windows. The inn groans to life as early risers, merchants, monks, and guilty conscience wanderers creep downstairs. Blankets are tossed aside. Boots are hunted. The goat has curled up on the hearth like a furry rug. Breakfast orders, pottage and ale, are placed with bleary-eyed urgency. Pobbling patrons hustle out to face the day. By sunrise, coins change hands again. New travelers enter, a farmer dragging a suspicious sack, a wary couple clutching each other, and yes, another dented helmet night with zero indoor etiquette. The cycle begins anew. The innkeeper sips his first morning ale, his ritual fuel. Marjorie reties her apron and refills the stew pot with water, salt, and a heavy dose of faith. Outside, the village stirs, a cart rattles by, a rooster crows and the blacksmith hammers with reckless abandon. Inside, the inn door swings open. Travelers nod, barter, and settle in. Questions about vegan auctions are met with polite head shakes. Lutes are plucked. Goats are shooed briefly. Through it all, this inn stands unchanged, a warm, chaotic haven where mistakes get swept up with the crumbs and nobody asks questions before breakfast. Now let's leap forward a few centuries and swap the stench of pottage for the sweet promise of prosperity. It's the early 1600s and we've landed in the Dutch Republic, a land as flat as a pancake and almost as remarkable. While Europe's great powers were busy squabbling over crowns and creeds, the Dutch quietly built an empire on commerce, culture, and yes, tulips. Imagine Silicon Valley, but everyone's wearing wooden shoes and trading herring instead of high-tech startups. It all kicked off with a bang in 1648 when the Dutch finally shook off Spanish rule after 8 decades of revolt. Freedom arrived with a flourish and suddenly, a tiny nation fished, traded, and painted its way to global dominance. Amsterdam exploded into the Wall Street of the 17th century. Canals bristled with ships bound for Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The Dutch East India Company, better known by its ominous acronym VC, was the Amazon Prime of its day, shipping spices, porcelain, and whatever else fetched top florins on European markets. The VC wasn't just a merchant fleet, it was the world's first megacorporation. Shareholders, stock trading, dividends, the Dutch pioneered the financial tools we still use today. They hustled across oceans in sleek, cannon-armed merchant vessels, bringing back cargoes of cinnamon from Ceylon, tea from China, and fortune from every port they touched. Back home, merchants swapped shipping logs for canvas and paint. This was the birth of the Dutch Golden Age in art. Rembrandt, Vermeer, Hals, these weren't court painters dependent on royal patronage, they were entrepreneurs creating works for a booming middle class. If you had enough coins, you could commission your portrait or still life of dead fowl and lemons. Tasteful, right? Vermeer, though less prolific, just 35 known paintings, perfected the art of domestic intimacy. His lit rooms, mothers pouring milk, women reading letters by soft window light, these quiet scenes became icons of the era. Rembrandt, on the other hand, reveled in drama, chiseling emotion into every facial wrinkle and biblical fable. And then tulip mania. Yes, flowers. Tulips swept through the Netherlands like a speculative fever dream. Rare striped bulbs, prized for a mysterious mosaic disease, sold for the price of canal houses. Farmers, chimney sweeps, even chimney sweepers' apprentices speculated in futures contracts on flowers that hadn't bloomed yet. When the bubble popped in 1637, fortunes dissolved overnight, but the Dutch shrugged it off. Embarrassed? Sure, but still richer and more innovative than their rivals. Their real power lay in logistics. Dutch ships outnumbered those of England and Spain combined. Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Hoorn, Delft. These weren't just towns. They were launchpads for global trade. The Dutch built canals, dikes, and levees to reclaim land from the sea, transforming marshes into farmland and waterways into highways. At home, urban planning was a revelation. Amsterdam's concentric canal ring, the Grachtengordel, was an engineering marvel and a tax dodge. Houses were taxed by width, not height, so everyone built tall, skinny homes with ornate gables. Inside, pulley systems hoisted furniture through windows, sparing staircases the heavy lifting. Public buildings, town halls, way houses, guild halls, sprouted across the Republic. Amsterdam's town hall, completed in 1655, earned Louis XIV's envy. He reportedly called it the eighth wonder of the world, and promptly copied its design for Versailles. Brick facades gleamed in the sun, streets were meticulously maintained, and civic pride blossomed in every corner. But greatness has a shadow. The BOC's trade flourished on the back of colonial conquest. Fortresses in Asia, private armies, and ruthless tactics to secure spice monopolies. Meanwhile, the West India Company profited from sugar, rum, and the transatlantic slave trade. The same republic commissioning paintings of milkmaids was shipping enslaved people by the thousands. Yet in economics and culture, the Dutch were trailblazers. They invented modern capitalism. Stock exchanges, joint stock companies, double-entry bookkeeping, insurance, and global accounting systems. If you've ever cursed complicated spreadsheets or analyzed your portfolio, tip a hat to 17th century Dutch merchants. Beyond trade, ideas flourished. The Netherlands became a haven for free thought, at least until it threatened profit. Descartes published here. Spinoza debated in local salons before his radical ideas about God and nature got him excommunicated even by tolerant Dutch rabbis. Leiden and Utrecht universities attracted students hungry for knowledge, dissecting optics, anatomy, and philosophy in spotless lecture halls. Mapmakers redrew the world with decorative atlases that were part art, part practical guide to every known coastline. Pamphlets, newspapers, scientific treatises circulated freely. An early information revolution. Literacy soared among merchants and craftsmen. Every tavern buzzed with news from Constantinople to the Caribbean. Meanwhile, painters like Vermeer captured domestic life with supernatural light. His few masterpieces became lasting testaments to the quiet dramas of everyday moments. Dutch art wasn't about mythic battles or endless piety. It was about a milkmaid's simple grace, a letter opened beside a sunlit window, a child's hand resting on a pew. The interior scenes were more than background, they were characters. You could hear floorboards creak, smell fresh bread, feel the hush of contemplative stillness. And that, more than naval power, was the beating heart of the Golden Age. An obsession with precision, order, and the beauty of ordinary life. The middle class loved it. Merchants, bakers, and brewers spent their profits on canvases instead of cathedrals. Their homes boasted more paintings than cutlery. They didn't want cherubs, they wanted realism, so artists delivered. Landscapes, still lives with fish and cheese. Portraits that immortalized pensive gazes in oil. This artistic industry was fast, detailed, and unapologetically local. But outside those sunlit rooms, tensions lurked. Political structure balanced on a knife edge. 7 provinces jealously guarding autonomy against the House of Orange's stadtholder. Each province was a mini-state, and national unity was always just one disagreement away from collapse. Religious tolerance, too, had limits. Calvinist elders dominated. Catholics and Jews were tolerated as long as they didn't flaunt big churches. Philip II's ghost still loomed. Spain had squeezed every florin from the Low Countries under the Catholic banner. Independence was fresh, but the scars ran deep. Abroad, rivals watched warily. England, once Protestant allies, now eyed Dutch dominance in trade. Naval skirmishes, the Anglo-Dutch Wars, broke out as both sides tested each other's fleets. The Dutch held their own under admirals like Michiel de Ruyter, equal parts pirate and strategist, famous for sailing up the Thames and capturing an English flagship just for sport. Still, war drained coffers. Defense expenses rose. Meanwhile, innovation slowed. The exuberant surge that gave rise to Vermeer and tulip lamps gave way to cautious reproduction. More cow scenes, more windmills, more canals on canvas. Bankers became risk-averse. The Republic's energy flickered. And then came the inevitable decline. England and France revamped their navies, copied Dutch trade practices, and built empires fueled by monarchical pomp. Louis XIV paraded armies while England's crown wooed colonists in the New World. The Dutch, innovative but small, found themselves edged out. The Golden Age didn't end with a bang. It faded like an embers beneath ashes. Competitors grew stronger, domestic divisions deepened, markets matured. Yet the Dutch legacy endured. Capitalism, urban planning, religious pluralism, modern science, and art's reverence for the everyday. Next time you swipe stocks on an app, admire a canal-lined cityscape, or get lost in the glow of a Rembrandt etching, remember this tiny soggy republic punched far above its weight. Their empire was built on balance sheets and brushstrokes, proving that power doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers in the quiet light of a simple Dutch interior. Forget stadiums and sponsorship logos, let's rewind over a millennium back to 776 BCE, when the first recorded Olympic Games kicked off in Olympia, a quiet sanctuary in the Peloponnese dedicated to Zeus. This wasn't a sporting event in the modern sense. It was a sacred ritual, a pilgrimage, and a battlefield of physiques polished by devotion rather than gold medals or corporate banners. Legend credits Hercules or King Pelops with founding the games after mythical feats, cleaning stables, winning chariot races, but by 776 BCE, the Olympics were official. The inaugural competition, a single foot race of roughly 600 feet, called the Stade. The victor, a cook named Charybdis of Elis, earned an olive wreath and eternal renown, proving that even a humble tradesman could ascend to hero status under Zeus's watchful gaze. These early contests were exclusively for freeborn Greek men. No women, no slaves, no foreigners. Participation and spectating were strictly regulated. Married women caught sneaking and risked banishment or worse. Only select priestesses enjoyed legitimate front row seats. The games were an expression of Greek identity, unity, and piety, a 4-year cycle that forged bonds between often warring city-states. In the sacred grove of Altus, athletes took oaths before Zeus Hegius, vowing fair play under penalty of sacrilege. Cheating was punished harshly. Fines funded bronze statues of Zeus lining the sanctuary, eternal reminders of moral failure. Before the first trumpet blast, bulls were sacrificed in smoke-filled ceremonies, their flesh shared by priests and spectators in a communal feast, an ancient barbecue in tribute to the divine. After the Stade came more foot races. The Dialos, 2 lengths of the track, about 400 m, and the Dalicos, long distance, up to 5 kilometers. No water breaks, no music playlists, just flesh, dust, and the burning sun. Next, the combat sports. Pale, wrestling, where competitors threw each other 3 times for victory. Pancration, a brutal blend of boxing and wrestling with minimal rules. And Pydmakia, boxing, fought with leather straps on knuckles, ending often in broken bones and groans. Then the pentathlon, the ultimate all-round test. A stadium foot race, wrestling, long jump, performed with weights called halteres for momentum, javelin, and discus. The favored athlete was neither the fastest nor strongest alone, but the one mastering every discipline. And to cap it all, chariot racing in the hippodrome, a spectacle of speed and peril where aristocrats owned the horses but sent a hired charioteer to risk life and limb. Crash, spin, overturned carriages. Divine drama unfolded on every lap. Unlike modern podiums, winners received no precious medals. Only the olive wreath plucked from the sacred tree of Olympia. Yet this humble crown carried immense weight. Victors returned home crowned with Clio's glory, immortalized in poems by bards like Pindar, their stories echoing in stone inscriptions and statue dedications for centuries. The sanctuary was more than an arena. It was a city pulsing with religious fervor. The Temple of Zeus, a Doric colossus housing Phidias's ivory and gold statue of the god, loomed over proceedings as one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Processions, sacrifices, and prayers intertwined with athletic contests. The games were worship incarnate. Massive crowds, tens of thousands of Greeks, packed the stadium's stone seating. Vendors hawked wine, figs, and honey cakes. Philosophers dissected ethics. Pickpockets plied their trade, and the deafening chorus of cheers rose like a wave. There were no reserved seats, no restrooms worth mentioning, and definitely no silent zones. Olympia was a festival of flesh, frenzy, and faith. But the games weren't just athletic or religious. They were profoundly political. City-states treated victories as proof of civic virtue. Sparta bragged through its champions. Athens sponsored athletes as ambassadors. Corinth and Thebes vied for athletic supremacy. The Olympic truce, Ekakeria, called for the cessation of hostilities so competitors and spectators could travel safely. In practice, not every war paused on Zeus's birthday, but the ideal of Pan-Hellenic unity shone brightly. Politics also echoed in the treasuries built at Olympia by victorious city-states, ornate structures to display offerings and celebrate civic achievements. These were ancient billboards. Look what we accomplished. Monuments to military triumphs or civic wealth lined the altis, reminding all visitors that power and piety went hand in hand. Training for Olympia was no casual affair. Athletes dedicated years, sometimes lifetimes, to honing their bodies. Gymnasia served both as fitness centers and schools of thought, where adolescent men practiced nude. Gymnos means naked, wrestling, running, and philosophical debate. Only those who proved themselves in regional tests during the 10 months before the Games and completed a 30-day supervised training at Elis earned the right to compete. Discipline was absolute. Diets of barley bread, cheese, figs, and olive oil rubbed on muscles prepared them for the punishing events. Slave trainers, the Paedotribi, pushed athletes through relentless drills. No protein shakes, no hydration tactics, just pure grit. Judges disqualified slackers on the spot. Participation in the games was a badge of merit. You were worthy of Zeus's approval only if you had earned it. The cost of fame, however, was lifelong. Victors returned as heroes. Free meals for life, public honors, statues, and poems in their name. Their hometowns celebrated with feasts and festivals. Yet they bore the burden of perpetual expectation. Every whisper of their names summoned memories of those Olympic triumphs. The games endured for over a millennium, held every 4 years through wars and plagues, until 393 CE, when Emperor Theodosius I, newly Christian, banned pagan festivals, consigning Olympia to ruin. Earthquakes, floods, and neglect buried temples and arenas beneath the earth, silencing the roar of crowds and the clash of bodies. The ancient flame lay dormant until the 19th century, when Baron Pierre de Coubertin, inspired by classical revival and a yearning for international camaraderie, resurrected the Olympic spirit. In 1896, Athens hosted the first modern Olympics. Track, field, gymnastics, and swimming, all clothed, timed, and broadcast to a world hungry for symbols of peace through sport. Today's Olympic Games may gleam with technology and corporate logos, but the heartbeat remains the same. Athletes from diverse nations test their limits in hopes of a symbolic olive wreath, a timeless emblem of excellence, unity, and the human will to strive for something greater than oneself. From Charybdis sprinting across dusty sands to Simone Biles twisting through the air, The Olympic journey traces humanity's evolving ideals of competition, cooperation, and spiritual devotion. It began as an act of worship beneath Zeus's statue and endures as a celebration of our shared potential. And so, whether you're running a 100m dash or cheering from your couch, remember, the Olympics are more than medals or records. They're a living testament to centuries of ritual, rebellion, artistry, and faith. An odyssey that began in a grove of olive trees and continues to inspire the world to chase glory one breath at a time. Fast forward to 1791, and we're in a very different world. One that had just fought for its independence from Britain and was now wrestling with governance under the new Constitution. The United States was a glorious experiment, but a bankrupt one. The Revolutionary War had left the treasury depleted, strapped with war debts so large they could choke a nation. The question on everyone's mind was simple yet daunting. How do we pay for all this? Enter Alexander Hamilton, the newly appointed Secretary of the Treasury and poster child for vigorous federal authority. Hamilton believed that a strong national government hinged on solid finances. His grand plan had three pillars: assume and consolidate state debts under the federal umbrella, establish a national bank to stabilize the currency and provide credit, and his most contentious proposal, impose a federal excise tax on distilled spirits, the infamous whiskey tax. Why target whiskey? Because in the late 18th century United States, whiskey wasn't just a beverage, it was liquid currency. Frontier farmers, especially in Pennsylvania, often distilled surplus grain into whiskey, easier to transport, longer lasting than corn or wheat, and universally traded. Taxing whiskey was like taxing the very fuel of frontier commerce. For Hamilton, it made perfect sense. Revenue would pour in from the densely populated East and more sparsely from the West, easing national debt without crippling industry. For Western farmers, it felt like betrayal, another burden imposed by distant elites. On the Western frontier, life was rough. Roads were little more than muddy ruts carved through wilderness. Law enforcement was a rumor, and government felt remote, if it existed at all. Whiskey was survival. A gallon could buy nails, pay laborers, or serve as barter with neighbors. Now, the federal government wanted a cut of every barrel. Big distillers in the East could afford a flat annual fee. Small-scale farmers faced a per-gallon levy that threatened their livelihoods. They saw Hamilton's tax as echoing the oppressive taxes of King George III. At first, resistance was passive. Tax collectors were ignored. Paperwork went unfiled. Local courts refused to enforce compliance. Then defiance turned bold. Inspectors who tried to collect tariffs faced intimidation, threats, and violence. Some were tarred and feathered. Others fled in terror. In western Pennsylvania, resistance coalesced into organized opposition. Town meetings morphed into militia gatherings. Resolutions demanding repeal of the tax were adopted in county after county. By 1793, what started as localized dissent had blossomed into full-blown rebellion. Western Pennsylvanians styled themselves defenders of liberty, invoking the same rhetoric that fueled the revolution. They saw the whiskey tax not merely as unfair, but as a constitutional overreach threatening the very ideals they had fought for: taxation with representation, local self-governance, and the right to chart one's own economic destiny. Tensions peaked in July 1794 at Bower Hill, the fortified home of John Neville, an ex-Revolutionary War general turned tax inspector. Neville had dared to collect whiskey duties, earning the ire of local farmers. One morning, a crowd of several hundred armed men surrounded his estate, demanding surrender of his tax records. Neville refused. Shots rang out. His home was besieged. Windows shattered. The manor set ablaze. 2 defenders were killed before the rebels withdrew. News of the skirmish spread like wildfire. Militia units from 3 counties converged on Pittsburgh, rallying around a centralized leadership. At its peak, the rebel force numbered nearly 7,000. Men in homespun shirts, carrying muskets and pitchforks, proclaiming they would defend their rights at all costs. They called for repeal of the tax and threatened independence from the eastern states. Back in Philadelphia, federal leaders watched in horror as the nascent republic teetered on the brink of civil war. If the government failed to enforce its own laws, the Constitution would be rendered meaningless. President George Washington recognized the gravity. This was the first true crisis of federal authority under the new Constitution, a test of national cohesion. Washington made a historic and controversial decision. He would personally lead the army into the field to quell the insurrection. Never before had a sitting president commanded troops in person. With Hamilton by his side, Washington mustered a federalized militia force of some 13,000 men drawn from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland, an army larger than the Continental Army at Yorktown. The march westward in the autumn of 1794 was a spectacle. Drums beating, officers in full regalia, a president astride a white horse, embodying the strength of civilian oversight of the military. The rebels, hearing of this formidable show of force, began to scatter. Leaders slipped away into the hills. Communities that once cheered resistance now cowered at the sight of disciplined columns marching in perfect formation. By the time Washington's army reached western Pennsylvania, open rebellion had evaporated. Tax collection resumed with minimal disruption. Local courts once again enforced federal laws. Washington, achieving his point without widespread bloodshed, handed over command to General Light Horse Harry Lee and returned to Philadelphia, leaving a legacy of federal resolve. The aftermath was a delicate dance between justice and mercy. Over 150 insurgents were arrested. 24 were indicted for treason, 12 convicted, and 2 sentenced to death. In a move blending statesmanship with political prudence, Washington pardoned the condemned men, striking a balance between upholding the law and embracing reconciliation. Yet the Whiskey Rebellion's true legacy lay not only in its swift suppression but in the fierce debates it ignited. Federalists hailed it as proof the Constitution worked. Laws enacted by Congress would be enforced by the executive and judiciary. They saw the rebellion as a necessary assertion of national authority, preventing fragmentation that could doom the Union. Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, viewed Washington's army as evidence of creeping central tyranny. They argued that farmers west of the mountains were unfairly targeted by policies designed for Eastern elites. They painted a stark contrast. Hamilton's vision of a commercial nation led by bankers versus Jefferson's ideal of a virtuous agrarian republic powered by independent yeomen. Thus, the rebellion became the crucible in which America's first political parties were forged. Newspapers exploded with fiery editorials. Political clubs galvanized support on both sides of the Appalachians. Whiskey rebels were lionized by some as heroes of popular resistance, denounced by others as traitors to the Republic. In practical terms, the whiskey tax remained difficult to enforce. Revenue fell short of expectations. Many frontier counties continued to pay little or nothing. When Jefferson assumed the presidency in 1801, his administration repealed the tax entirely, acknowledging its failure and the political cost of a policy that had stung the most vulnerable citizens. Yet the lessons of the Whiskey Rebellion endured. It affirmed the federal government's right to levy taxes and enforce laws, strengthening the executive branch. It underscored the fragile balance between national unity and regional autonomy, and it cemented the principle that government, not unlike good whiskey, must be distilled carefully. Too strong an excess can provoke rebellion, while too weak leaves emptiness. Today, when debates flare over taxation, federal overreach, or protests on the steps of state houses, echoes of 1794 resonate. The Whiskey Rebellion remains a seminal case study in the exercise and limits of governmental power, illustrating that in a republic, laws gain legitimacy only when they reflect the consent and capacity of the governed. With the whiskey tax repealed and partisan fires stoked, the young republic pressed on, but the Whiskey Rebellion left an indelible mark. It illustrated that enforcement of federal laws required not only legal authority but political legitimacy. Laws unmoored from public consent breed resistance, and government strength must be balanced with empathy for constituents' realities. In the decades that followed, the debate over federal versus state power deepened. The rebellion became a touchstone for constitutional scholars. Was the Union a compact of sovereign states, or a single nation with supreme federal authority? Chief Justice John Marshall, in landmark rulings like McCulloch v. Maryland 1819, would echo Hamilton's vision by upholding broad federal powers and cementing the principle of implied powers. Yet Jefferson's agrarian ideal endured in American political culture. The notion of the yeoman farmer as the backbone of the Republic inspired policies supporting smallholders, westward expansion, and local self-government. The rebellion's memory shaped the ethos that government must not trample individual liberties in the name of centralized efficiency. Culturally, the Whiskey Rebellion entered folklore as the frontier's heroic stand against overweening authority. Songs, pamphlets, and later histories portrayed it as Second War of Independence, a David and Goliath tale emphasizing rugged individualism and the right to protest unjust laws. Tourists today can visit the Bower Hill site near Pittsburgh, where markers recount Neville's siege and the rebels' pitched battle. Politically, the episode catalyzed the first-party system. Federalists, proud of the rebellion suppressed, used the event to validate a strong central government. Democratic Republicans, meanwhile, lionized the Whiskey Boys as pioneers of popular sovereignty. Election campaigns hinged on interpretations of 1794. Was Washington's army a guardian of order or an occupying force? As America matured, the rebellion's lessons echoed in other conflicts. The nullification crisis of 1832-33 in South Carolina, where tariff opponents tested federal resolve, the Missouri Compromise debates, balancing sectional interests, and even the Civil War, the ultimate test of Union authority, each invoked the specter of citizens resisting perceived overreach, reminding leaders that legitimacy rests on dialogue, not coercion alone. Beyond politics, the Whiskey Rebellion impacted taxation policy itself. Policymakers grew wary of levies that fell heavily on vital regional industries. Instead, they pursued tariffs on imports, concentrated at ports and easier to monitor, while seeking broader-based income or property taxes only after the Civil War. The frontier's defiance reminded generations that tax policy must consider economic landscapes and cultural norms. In legal theory, the rebellion cemented doctrines of due process and fair enforcement. Courts scrutinized whether tax assessments followed proper procedures. Legislators embedded safeguards to prevent arbitrary seizures. Thus, the rebellion spurred maturation of administrative law, shaping how agencies today implement regulations and collect revenues. Educationally, the Whiskey Rebellion became a staple in American history curricula. High school textbooks cast it as a pivotal moment when the Constitution proved its mettle, or, alternately, as a cautionary tale about alienating frontier citizens. Students debate its implications. Was federal overreach justified to preserve Union stability? Or did the rebellion embody democracy's right to resist unjust governance? Economically, the frontier tax refusal presaged later resistance to prohibition in the 1920s. Smuggling and bootlegging echoed 1794 tactics. Secret stills hidden in mountains, widespread public disobedience when law diverged too sharply from popular will. Both episodes underscore the enduring tension between moral legislation and practical compliance. The Whiskey Rebellion also influenced American attitudes toward protest. Unlike British suppression of the Stamp Act, where colonists saw their rights trampled, American resistance demanded clarity on political representation. Post-rebellion, protest was increasingly channeled through ballots rather than bullets, fueling party formation, civic associations, and the expansion of suffrage. By mid-19th century, the frontier itself had shifted westward, but the frontier spirit, self-reliance, suspicion of distant authority, remained central to American identity. The rugged individualist myth owes much to those frontier farmers who, barrels of whiskey in tow, dared to confront the federal government and, in doing so, tested the boundaries of Republican governance. In our modern era, the rebellion's resonances are unmistakable. Debates over federal mandates, from healthcare to environmental regulations, often echo the core question: how far may government intrude before citizens rebel? Grassroots movements, protests, and legislative pushback demonstrate that compliance rests not on coercion but on negotiated legitimacy. The Whiskey Rebellion also reinforced that leadership matters. Washington's personal involvement signaled resolve, but his ultimate clemency displayed wisdom. Leaders who wield authority must also discern when to extend mercy, to foster reconciliation rather than perpetual conflict. That duality, strength tempered by compassion, remains a hallmark of effective governance. As we consider future challenges, cybersecurity, pandemic responses, digital privacy, the lessons endure. Laws must be crafted with empathy for affected communities. Enforcement must be fair, transparent, and proportional, and avenues for peaceful protest must remain open, lest resistance take a more combustible form. So, next time you raise a glass, whiskey or otherwise, to toast independence or debate political power, remember the frontier farmers of 1794. Their barrels may have sparked a rebellion, but their legacy shaped the enduring American experiment, a perpetual balancing act between liberty and order, between local autonomy and national unity. As our journey winds down, let's pause to reflect on the threads weaving through these tales of ends, empires, games, and rebellions. At first glance, a medieval inn, the Dutch Golden Age, the ancient Olympics, and the Whiskey Rebellion might feel worlds apart. Yet each story reveals universal facets of the human condition: our need for community, our pursuit of prosperity, our desire for recognition, and our willingness to stand up for principles that shape our shared niche in history. Think about that medieval inn. At its core, it was more than a place to sleep or a purveyor of questionable pottage. It was a crucible where travelers converged, a melting pot of backgrounds, dialects, motivations, and identities. The innkeeper and Marjorie, the barmaid, created a temporary society governed by informal norms: who could be roused at dawn, how one bartered for bread, which songs merited a free meal. Their domain was defined by adaptability, resourcefulness, and the unspoken role that chaos was the price of hospitality. Fast forward to the Dutch Republic, where canals replaced dirt floors and stock exchanges replaced tips in the coin jar. Yet the same spirit of innovation, risk-taking, and communal enterprise thrived. Merchants, craftsmen, and artists formed a dynamic ecosystem, each playing a specialized role, yet all interdependent. The BOC's global network was the medieval inn writ large, a hub of exchange of spices, ideas, capital, and art, connecting disparate corners of the world under a shared economic niche. Then we visited Olympia, where athletic prowess and religious devotion intertwined. There, the niche was spiritual excellence expressed through physical feats. Freeborn Greek men relinquished personal equipment, competing nude, to ensure equality and honest competition. City-states shelved rivalries to honor Zeus. The games forged a pan-Hellenic identity, reminding us that communal gatherings, whether for commerce, nourishment, or worship, nourish bonds that transcend individual ambition. Finally, the Whiskey Rebellion showed us how these binding ties can fray when governance overreaches or fails to address grassroots realities. Frontier distillers, once valued community members, became pariahs under Hamilton's whiskey tax. The rebellion underscored that legitimacy in any social contract, be it the inn's informal rules, the Dutch corporate charters, or the Olympic truce, depends on mutual trust and perceived fairness. When a policy deprives people of their economic lifeblood, resistance can erupt, reshaping political and legal frameworks for generations. Across these narratives, we see cycles of order and upheaval: inns bustling then emptying, empires rising then waning, games held then banned, taxes imposed then repealed. Yet in each cycle, communities adapt. The innkeeper learns to navigate a new crowd, Dutch merchants pivot to new markets when empires shift, Greek athletes find new venues under Roman rule until the modern Olympics rekindle ancient flames. American policymakers evolve taxation methods to reflect frontier sensitivities. These patterns echo in today's world. Digital platforms have become the modern day in spaces where diverse voices meet, exchange information, and negotiate invisible norms. Global trade still relies on networks born in the Dutch era, now managed with algorithms instead of ledgers. International sporting events, from Olympics to esports, perpetuate the ancient human drive for excellence, identity, and unity. And debates over taxes, regulations, and civic protest reflect the same need to balance authority with local realities, ensuring laws earn legitimacy from the governed. Whether you're a content creator carving out your niche on YouTube, a small business navigating global supply chains, an athlete striving for personal bests, or a citizen advocating for policy change, your story aligns with these grand arcs. You're participating in a continuum of social innovation, forging communities, crafting institutions, testing boundaries, and redefining what constitutes fairness and shared purpose. So, what lessons can we carry forward? Hospitality and adaptability, like the medieval in any platform, digital or physical, must be welcoming yet resilient. You need clear guidelines but also the flexibility to handle surprises. Collaborative prosperity. The Dutch model teaches us that prosperity arises when specialized actors, artisans, technologists, entrepreneurs connect through robust infrastructures, whether canals or internet backbones. Shared identity through competition. The Olympics reveal that competition rooted in mutual respect and common values fosters unity, whether among nations or niche communities online. Legitimacy through empathy. The Whiskey Rebellion reminds us that policies, economic, social, or creative, must resonate with local experiences. Enforcement alone won't sustain harmony. Empathy and dialogue are essential. As you navigate your own endeavors, be it launching a channel in a crowded niche, spearheading community initiatives, or advocating for change, remember these historical touchstones. They illuminate not just grand events of the past but the microcosms of everyday life. Throughout history, societies have thrived when they balanced structure with spontaneity, integrated diverse voices around shared goals, and anchored authority in the consent of the governed. They faltered when rigid hierarchies ignored grassroots wisdom or when roles became disconnected from lived experience. Today's world pulses with new frontiers: AI-driven economies, virtual reality communities, global health challenges, climate imperatives. Yet our foundational need remains unchanged: to create spaces where people feel heard, valued, and motivated to contribute. Whether you're moderating a forum, engineering a supply chain, coaching a sports team, or drafting legislation, you're building the next iteration of that medieval inn, that Dutch trading post, that sacred stadium, and that frontier distillery. As we conclude, ask yourself, what's your niche in this grand continuum? How will you cultivate community, drive innovation, foster fair competition, and craft policies that resonate with those you serve? History's mosaic invites you to apply its patterns to 21st century challenges. And if you found value in this exploration, if these stories spark ideas for your own projects, smash that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and share in the comments which chapter resonated with you most. Are you drawn to the inns of medieval Europe, the commerce of the Dutch Golden Age, the spectacle of Olympia, or the lessons of Philadelphia's frontier? Wherever you fit, you're part of the ongoing human saga. Stay tuned for part 8, where we'll wrap up with practical takeaways to help you apply these insights today: tools, strategies, and perspectives to carve your niche and influence the course of your community. Until then, may your pursuits be as spirited as a medieval ale, as innovative as a Dutch ship, as triumphant as an Olympic victor, and as principled as a frontier farmer. Here in our final chapter, we bridge history and action, translating the tales of medieval inns, Dutch trade dynasties, Olympic devotion, and frontier rebellion into concrete strategies you can apply today. Whether you're a content creator, entrepreneur, community leader, or engaged citizen, these takeaways will help you carve out your own niche and foster sustainable success. 1. Define your community in. Clarify roles and roles, like the innkeeper and Marjorie. Set clear expectations for participation, comment guidelines, contribution standards, or customer etiquette. This balance of hospitality and structure keeps chaos manageable. Cultivate trust, show up consistently. Respond to questions, enforce roles fairly, and recognize regular contributors. Trust is your hearth, keep it burning bright. Adapt to surprises. Unexpected events, from algorithm changes to sudden feedback spikes, are inevitable. Build workflows that let you pivot: template responses, flexible schedules, and emergency plans for downtime. 2. Build robust infrastructure like Dutch merchants. Leverage scalable tools, invest in platforms and processes, email systems, analytics dashboards, content calendars that grow with you. Early friction compounds. Choose solutions that support expansion. Foster specialization and collaboration. Just as painters, merchants, and shipbuilders thrived in interlocking roles, assemble or tap into teams of specialists, designers, writers, developers who amplify each other's strengths. Diversify revenue streams. The VUC succeeded by trading spices, textiles, and people. Regrettably, ethically, you can diversify: ads, sponsorships, affiliate partnerships, digital products, and services to reduce dependence on any single source. 3. Infuse ritual and recognition a la Olympia. Celebrate milestones, publicly honor achievements, follower milestones, product launches, fundraising goals. Use badges, shoutouts, or digital olive wreaths to reward contributors, reinforcing a culture of excellence. Encourage healthy competition, post friendly contests or challenges, hackathons, design sprints, writing prompts, where participants showcase their skills. Structured competition strengthens bonds and elevates standards. Integrate shared values. Anchor your community around a clear mission, education, innovation, social impact, mirroring the shared reverence Greeks showed for Zeus. The spiritual dimension, metaphorical or literal, unites and motivates. 4. Ensure policy legitimacy inspired by frontier lessons. Solicit feedback early before rolling out new roles or features. Consult your community. Surveys, pilot groups, and beta tests surface concerns and build ownership. Balance enforcement and empathy. When issues arise, trolls, misinformation, payment disputes, apply roles consistently but with compassion. Clear, appealed mechanisms and transparent rationales prevent alienation. Stay attuned to local realities. Just as Hamilton's tax provoked frontier backlash, global policies can misfire at local levels. Tailor policies or offer exemptions for underserved segments, geographic, demographic, or budgetary, to maintain trust. 5. Drive decisions with data and human insight. Double entry bookkeeping for content. Track not only high-level analytics, views, subscribers, but granular metrics, engagement by topic, comments, sentiment, conversion by source. Accurate records reveal what resonates. Blend quantitative and qualitative, complement numbers with voice of customer, focus groups, in-depth interviews, open feedback channels to understand motivations behind the metrics. Iterate responsively, use agile cycles, plan, execute, review, adjust. Rapidly test new formats, posting schedules, or pricing, then pivot based on real-world results. 6. Scale with integrity and inclusivity. Model Dutch tolerance ethos, embrace diverse perspectives, cultural, ideological, experiential, while upholding core community values. Inclusive practices broaden your reach and foster innovation. Guard against tulip mania bubbles, avoid chasing viral trends at the expense of substance. Short-term spikes can distract from long-term sustainability. Focus on evergreen value rather than fleeting hype. Institutionalize continuous learning. Just as Dutch universities and salons derived on idea exchange, create internal knowledge hubs, wikis, mentorship programs, brown bag lunches to upskill your team and adapt to emerging challenges. 7. Embed ethical leadership. Channel Washington's balanced resolve, stand firm on mission-critical decisions, protecting brand integrity, upholding quality, while demonstrating humility through transparency and, when appropriate, corrective action, apologies. Policy adjustments. Demonstrate organizational mercy, have clear pathways for remediation, user appeals, customer exchanges, community restoration processes that reconcile missteps without punitive overkill. Foster a culture of accountability. Publish regular progress reports, financial summaries, diversity metrics, impact assessments to build stakeholder confidence and preempt concerns. 8. Nurture your enduring legacy. Document your journey. Archival blogs, case studies, and season retrospectives serve both marketing and historical purposes, showcasing evolution and reinforcing brand narrative. Invest in future stewards. Identify and mentor rising leaders, community moderators, brand ambassadors, junior staff to carry forward your vision, ensuring continuity as your organization scales or founders move on. Focus on long-term impact. Like the ripple of the Olympics or the resonance of the Dutch Golden Age, aim for contributions that outlast immediate gains, open-source projects, community scholarships, enduring art that embed your work in collective memory. These 8 pillars: hospitality, infrastructure, ritual, legitimacy, data-driven agility, inclusivity, ethical leadership, and legacy building are distillations of centuries of human enterprise. By weaving these into your strategy, you honor the lessons of history while crafting a future uniquely your own. Thank you for joining this epic journey from humble inns to global revolutions. If these insights spark new ideas, hit like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and share which pillar you'll implement first. Drop your questions or success stories in the comments. Let's continue this dialogue and co-create the next chapter of our shared niche. Until next time, may your hearth burn bright, your ventures prosper, your competitions forge camaraderie, and your governance earn enduring trust. Cheers to carving your niche in the grand tapestry of human endeavor.